So we are moving on to the authentication, that is the login and sign up part. And then in order for us to be able to implement this, we're going to be using the context API, and then the three files that we are going to need is the auth context, right? So we are going to need auth context. So I'm going to say auth context.js. We are going to need the auth action.js, or auth actions actually. Auth actions.js, and then over here we are going to need what? Auth reducer. Auth reducer. Okay. Alright, I realize that most of the time most people tend to do everything here, but it's more of a best practice to separate your contents. So we handle the auth context, auth actions, and auth reducer separately, and then we bring them together. Alright, that is one of the best practices. Alright, so now that we know this, let us go to the login page and then let's receive the values. So there are a few ways we can do that. We can use ref, we can also use state, and then even in the use state we can do two things. We can have separate use states for all the different values, but we can also create a simple object and access them through these objects, right? So let's use the object use state, right? So I'm going to say const what? I can say auth and set auth, right? And then I can equate it to a use state here. Then let me check my mic. Okay, it works. Okay, I set it to a use state. Then inside this use state, I'm going to give it a bunch of variables, right? So I can say this is the email, and the email is going to have an empty string. Then we are going to have the password, also going to have an empty string, right? Now that we have these two bad boys set up for us over here, what are we going to do next? Okay, so we have these two objects, right? They're in the auth, right? So how do we do this? Let's go into the input here. I'm going to come and say on change. So inside this on change, I can say that we are taking you're taking the E, and then this E, so we have this E here, and then we are going to say set auth to be what? We're going to say set auth to be E. So we are going to open this and say that the email, right, should be what? Email should be e.target.value. Okay, now that we've been able to set this up, we can just copy this and then set the same thing up for the password as well, and then we change this to password. Okay, so we can, after doing all these things, we can just log out. We can log it out by saying how do I want to log it out? Okay, let's just log it out here. Let's just log it out here, auth. Alright, so I'm quickly gonna go into the login page. So /login. Okay, so it's here, right? If I type anything, you should see it re-render. If I type the password too, you should also see it, right? So yeah, the password and also this one, right? So yeah, we can see it's receiving all the information that it needs to receive, right? So I think we are good to go, right? Alright, so I want to quickly create a form that is going to submit the values that we input inside the states, right? So I'm quickly going to come around like just below this, and I'm going to write form, and then I can just clean out the action really quick. Clean out the action, then over here I'll just cut this off, and then just paste it here. Right now, that we have this, we can say we can add an on submit, and then we can say handle login. Right now, let's save that and let's come here. Gonna cut this real quick, and then I would say handle login as we named it, and then it's going to be a function, right? And then obviously it will be an asynchronous function, obviously, but for the meantime, so here we can say auth. We want to make sure that we are console logging the auth, so we can go back here and test it out one more time. Let's refresh so we can clean out the terminal, and then we can test that, okay, at gmail.com. Alright, so I'm going to send. Alright, so as you can see, anytime we send, it refreshes, right? But we want to prevent that. So what are we going to do? I'm going to go back to VS Code and I'll pass in this parameter, which is e, and then I'll come down here and I'll say e.prevent what? Default. Prevent default. Alright, and then I'll just close it out like this. Then I'll go back here, and then I can change it one more time at gmail.com, and I'll come here and I'll send. Alright, so as you can see, the password, it's only the password that is being submitted, which is wrong, which that's not what is supposed to happen. So how we fix this is we go back to VS Code, right, and then we come here. Right now, as you can see, this is an object, right? So what we needed to make sure that we did, right, is you need to take note of this. Now when you're passing in values like these, especially when you're dealing with objects, when you want to be able to collect the data from the rest of the other fields inside an object without actually specifying, you want to add the spread operator, right? So you can do something like this here, then you say what? Auth, right? Then your comma, right? Then it says everything, every object key and value inside the auth variable or the auth state, pick it up, and then let's do the same thing. I'm just going to copy, Control C while I'm on the same line, then come here and paste as well. Then that should be it basically. So when we go back into the browser to test, when we test, you can see, let me refresh. Right now, as you can see, we have both the email and the password being logged into the console. So you need to take note of this. It's very important. Now what happens if we just submit without the email? You see that it goes through, but we want to correct that by coming to both of these inputs and then adding the required property, right? Required, I think true, or but we can also leave it like that. Copy it and then come here and then add it, and then it should work. So without the email, it's required, please fill this field, and then here it's also required. Okay, let's see we get the right message. Yeah, fill this field. And so and we want to make sure that the password that you are passing shouldn't be 3 characters or less, right? So we are basically going to come to the password side and add a min, think min length, then we can say 3, right? So when we go back here and pass in 2, right? Okay, and then let's test the one for just min and see. Let's test for just min and see. So I'm going to submit the same thing. Okay, it went through. Okay, it did go through as well. Okay, so for min, when we just did 2 characters, we realized it still went through. So the best thing to do is what's the first one we decided to use, which is the min length. So you can't use, so if let's say I put in 5, you can't use less than 5 characters, right? It needs to be 5 and above, right? So if I go and I say, let's say 4, right? Okay, you need 5 characters, right? So if I add 5, you see that it goes through. Okay, so basically that's what we needed to understand. Let's now move on to the next thing. All right, now let's start working on the auth context. So basically what the context is basically going to help us do is we want to be able to access our user from all parts of the application, right? So basically our context basically comes because we have something called prop drilling, right? And then prop drilling, it's like you're just passing props through components, but with context it comes to solve that problem by giving us some states with some values to those states, and then we can be able to access these values no matter where we are in application without having to pass through props. Okay, so in order for us to create something like that, let us begin. Okay, now we are going to import create context, but yeah, let's not even import it, we can get it straight, right? So let's first of all create our initial state. Okay, our initial state, I'm trying to get the underscore. Okay, initial state, and then it's going to be a quick object which is going to be a user. The user is null, user should be null because we've not logged in yet, so there is no user. And then we have is fetching or is loading, however you want to call it, is fetching or is loading, however you can use it. You can set that to false. Then we can set the error to false. We've not logged in yet, there's no error, or we've not received any error yet, right? So now that we have the initial state, we can start by creating our context. So I'll say const what auth, let's export it, export const auth context is equal to create context. Alright, it's imported nicely. We are going to pass in what the initial state that we created above. Alright, now that we have that, let's export our context provider so we can use it around our component, right? So export const, then we say what auth context provider. Alright, now this is going to be a normal component that is going to have its state, right? You're going to have to give it a state or a reducer variable or a reducer variable basically, right? So this way we're going to use reducer. So we give it a state and then a dispatch. Okay, then we equate it to what use reducer. Okay, then inside use reducer we pass in what the auth context, passing the auth context and the initial state. Okay, passing the auth context and the initial state. Then under here we give it return. Then inside, what are we going to return? We are going to return the auth context provider component, right? So the provider, yeah, I'm going to select that and I'll close it. Then basically why do we have this? You remember I mentioned that we are going to have to wrap it around our main component, which is the app.js x here, right? So that we can access it from any part of our application, right? So in order for us to be able to do that, we need to add a prop to it, a children prop, right? So how are we going to do that? I'm going to come here and say children. Right now, with this children, I can just copy this and paste it here. Alright, but what exactly are we trying to pass through, right? That is what we are going to pass through the value prop over here. Now, for this value prop, it's going to be an object, right? But which object is that? The object is going to have this key, and then the value, which is going to be this state dot what user. Okay, then we are going to have another key, which is fetching, right? And then we are going to give it this value of state dot what is fetching. All right, then we are going to have to add one more, which is error, and then the value is going to be state dot error. Right, now that we've been able to set this up, let's not forget to pass this patch, alright, because we'll need it. Alright, so now that we've been able to do that, let's go into the main.jsx, like I said, and let's wrap it around it. So we can see what auth context provider. Alright, then we can now wrap it around it. Now we should be able to access our user states from any part of application.
Okay, but let's look at this part here. It looks like we have an error. Okay, it says internal server failed to parse for JS syntax. It seems to be JSX. Alright, so I forgot, since we're using v React, we are going to have to change this to JSX. Oh, I have to, yeah, we have to change it to JSX. So going to click on JSX. So JSX, then let's work on this one as well. The JSX, then this one too. You have .jsx, right? Alright, so now we should, okay, it says, okay, resolved. I'm going to go make sure that this is JSX now. Okay, then let us go. Okay, now it's okay, we've taken out the error. Alright, so I'm going to quickly talk about why we need the auth context, the auth actions, and the auth reducer. Right now, like I said before, auth context basically helps us, you know, or the context in general basically helps us access a bunch of values from anywhere in our application. Right now, in our process, or in our login process, basically what is going to happen is we are going to have a bunch of actions. Okay, right now these actions would be login start, login success, and then login error. Right now, the thing is that the actions is basically, you see, while the context is responsible for helping us store the states, right, the actions in general helps us pass, or helps us perform certain actions, okay, certain activities. Right now, once we are performing these activities, right, we want to use the reducer to assign the values coming out of those activities to the states in the context again. Right, so let's quickly build the actions. Right, let's quickly build the actions really quick so that you understand what I'm trying to say. Alright, so in order for us to start building the actions, let's just go straight into the actions here, right? And then let's just start. Right, so I'm quickly going to say export const login start, like I mentioned. Okay, login starts, then it's going to take in what user info,
Okay, it's going to take in user info or user credentials. Okay, and then after it takes it in, we are alright, then inside we are basically going to give it a type, and then this type we are going to say what in capitals, login start, and then can copy it over, and then change this to login success, and then change this to login failure. Alright, now this place is basically going to take in user, right? And then let's make sure we've changed this to success. Okay, success, let's change this to failure. Okay, failure, right? Then we are going to pass the payload. A payload would be this user, the user that we are going to get whenever we log in or whenever login is successful. So if you see here inside, I think we used a new one called Henry, right? So it was Henry and Henry, right? So let's use that. So I can say Henry and Henry, right? So whenever login is successful, the user information that we get out, right, this user that we are getting out is what we are going to basically pass in as the payload. And then let me change something really quick. I'm gonna go change something. Alright, now that error is basically what we are going to pass to the payload as well as the error, and then we are going to take this, pass it through the parameter really quick. Alright, so now that we've been able to set this up, let's just move straight into the reducer. Alright, so inside the reducer, we're going to go there, and then we start. We say const what? Auth reducer, and then it's going to take in what? The state and the action, and then we're going to say that we are starting as switch statements, right? So this switch is basically going to take in what? The action dot type, which obviously should be these ones, the type here, action dot type, right? The type, and then based off of this, we are going to write our statements, right? We want to make sure that at the end of the day, we are exporting what we are, or at the end of the day, we are returning the final state. Okay, but in order for us to be able to return these final states, we are going to, so let's return the state here. We are going to have to return the states based off of certain conditions. All right, so yes, let's just get started, or let's just find out what these conditions are, right? So I think I'm going to have to push this up. Yeah, okay, so by default we want to return a state, but we can't just return just any state. We're going to return the state based off of certain conditions. So what is the first condition? We're going to say that if we check and it's login start, the action is action.login start here. So if you check and it's login starts, we want to do something. Okay, so we want to assign, we want to return this user becomes what? Null. Okay, then is fetching is fetching becomes what? True. Right, then error should be false. Okay, so you just clicked on the button and then things are working. All you are looking for is your loading state, right? So its fetching is going to be set to true, and no user has been assigned yet, and then there's no error that we found yet, right? So we can move on to the second case. Okay, so I'm going to say that if it is login success, if it is login success, let us return a few things. User action dot payload is fetching then it becomes what? False, right? So now what are we doing here? Now as you can see over here, the login becomes success, the user is assigned the payload, and the is fetching becomes false, then error is false. Now why is it like that? Now that login has been successful, just like how here when we log in it becomes successful and we get this information, we're going to send this information or assign that information to the user state that we have over here. Okay, then now that it is successful, there's no need to load again, and then we've not found any error, so both of these sides can be set to false. Okay, now that we have that in mind, let's now work on the final one, or the final case, and then that is going to be what? Login failure. Alright, so for the login failure here, it's failed, so we don't assign any, or there's even no user to be assigned basically, so you're just going to make it null. Okay, then over here we set it to false as well. Then over here we say what? Action dot payload, because definitely there was an error, so we just get that error and assign it to the state over here, right? Or basically to the state in the action here, which is this one, sorry, so the error here, right? Okay, so now that we have that set up, we want to move on how we can use this inside our project. All right, now let's just get started with that as well. So all we have to do is go into the context here. This is a mistake. I'm going to clean this, and I'm going to say auth reducer. We're going to pass in the auth reducer instead. So it has been imported. If I click on it, it should take me here. Okay, so instead of it to be imported just like that, it feels weird. That's not what is supposed to happen, and so I'm basically going to export it, right? I'm going to export default, the auth reducer here, and then I can now use it in here like we have to. Okay, so it's here now, we can use it like we want. All right, good. So yeah, let's now go into the login and then start performing some magic. Let's start performing some magic. Right, so we're going to go into the API here. Right now I just want to make something really clear. When you're dealing with issues, especially when it comes to authentication, you want to deal with it a little bit differently. You want to add some extra, you want to give it a special place to sit in, so that you can, if you have any issues, you can tackle it separately, right? So what I'm going to do is over here, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to name that auth.api.js. Okay, now inside this I'm basically going to create the functionality or I'm basically going to create the module or the function that we are going to call inside the login file in order for us to be able to handle login, right? Just like how for the other ones, I think, is it I think, okay, it's not the right bar, it should be the newsfeed. Yeah, so you see how we have these separate functions. Yes, that's what we are going to do for the auth, that is login right now. So how we're going to do it is I'm going to first of all export const, now say login auth, then I'm going to say async, user info dispatch, then over here I can say that now that we are running the login auth, okay, we can now do our login start. Right now, what did we say happens at the login start? When we go to the auth actions, login start, yeah, you can see that its fetching becomes true, right? So the loading is set to true, right? Okay, so we're going to do what? Dispatch, right? I'm going to dispatch it like this. So we're going to set the type to what? Login start, okay. Now that we have this, we can now do our try catch here. Okay, let me check my mic. Works. Can now do the try catch here. Then over here I'll say const what? I'll say const response is going to be what? Await API dot posts. Right, so where are we getting this API from? Don't forget we did it over here. Okay, so all we need to do is API dot then the method, then you add the remaining endpoints. So let's go back. So API dot post, right? Then inside we passing what? Auth / login, because that was how we set it up at the back end. If you remember, we have auth, and then when you go inside we have login, right? So I'm going to close this and close this. Then we are going to quickly pass in the user info. Okay, then right after we do that, we want to check if it's done, right? Because until we will catch an error that will log it out here or do whatever we'll do with the error down here, everything that happens here is successful, right? So I'm just going to come and dispatch again. So now it's going to be login success, right? So I can give it a type of what? I can give it a type of login success, just like how we did in our actions, right? Then we send this user. Okay, so login success, then down here we give the payload or with the payload objects that we created there, or key that we created there in the actions. We pass in what? The response that we get. Okay, so it's going to be what? Res dot data dot what? Data. But why is it dot data? It's dot data because when we come into the auth here, we pass data here instead of something more substantial. But I don't want us to repeat dot data, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change here to user data. Okay, and then bring it out as user data. I'm going to do the same for here as well. and bring it out as what user data. Okay, but how do we verify this? If I go to Postman and then I search, I send, you can see that here's data, but now it's become what user data, so we can pass that instead. So I'm going to go back and then I'll say what user data. Okay, now for the error handling, I'm going to say dispatch. Then what are we dispatching? We want to make sure that we are checking for the type, and then the type is going to say that in this case is going to be what? Login failure. Login failure. And so the payload is going to be what? Error. Okay, right, now that we've been able to set this up, we can now go into our login page. Where is it? Can now go into our login page and then start working with it. All right, now let's just begin. All right, so what I'm going to do here is that I'm quickly going to utilize what we did over here, right? So yeah, let's just start using. But before we start using it, we want to look at this. You can see that I made a mistake here. I'm just going to correct it. So login success, right? So let's go back to the login page. All right, now that we are in here, let us start by doing a few things. I can just cut this out and then start by importing a few things, right? So let's say const, and then let's create like an empty object and then equate it to what? useContext. Let's equate it to useContext. Okay, it's already imported here. Then I'm going to say auth context. Alright, now that we've done that, I want to say what? User. I want to call the user state. I want to call the isFetching state. I want to call the error state, and I want to call the dispatch method. Okay, so now that we have all of these bad boys here, let us start using them real quick. So we already have prevent default. Okay, we already have prevent default. What we are going to do is I'm just going to say login auth, right? Login auth. Then I'm going to open it up and then pass for the user info. I'm going to pass the email object, and then that is going to be the auth.email, right? And then I'm going to pass in for the password. It's going to be what? auth.password. Alright, then now that we are done with that, we want to pass in the second argument, right? And that is going to be what? Dispatch. Okay, alright, now that we've been able to do this, we want to quickly log out the user so that you can see the user come out. Before we do anything, let me go down here and then remove the limit, right? Let us set the limit to 3 instead. So I'm quickly going to come here and set the limit to 3. Alright, now that I've set that, we can now test it out. Okay, so I'm going to come here. I'm going to say Henry at gmail.com, then Henry again, then I'll send. Alright, now as you can see, it is here, nice and clean. Alright, so our state has been dispatched to the user state, right? So basically this is what the user currently has, right? So that's what, so I'm basically saying that it has been successful. Okay, alright, so basically over here we want to make sure that you see that we have the isFetching state here, of which it is a boolean. So over here we can see that we can say if isFetching is set to true, then let us change the text inside the button to be logging in, but if it's not and it's false, I want to set it back to what? I want to set it back to login. Okay. Alright. So now that we have this, let's start testing. Let's start testing it. Alright. So I have Henry at gmail.com. Henry. Then I would send. Alright, so this one was pretty quick, so we didn't see it, but basically it works. Alright. Okay, so that is it. Let's move on to the next thing. Now look, don't get me wrong, it might seem a little difficult, but hey, it doesn't come easy like that, right? So all you have to do is practice. Now if I say practice, you have to actually practice with real world projects. You know, you need to set goals in front of you. You know, don't, I mean, yeah, having simple projects like calculators and tic-tac-toe, it's cool, right? But that's not what gets you the job, right? That's not what lands you the big paying job, as everyone, or as almost everyone here inside this watching this video wishes one day. So you need to really have, you know, something substantial. You need to, and yeah, basically you trying to have something substantial is you trying as much as possible to build. They shouldn't really be complex, but you know, like they should be substantial, like social media, like a Netflix clone, like a Fiverr clone, like a flight ticket booking app, you know, something like, or maybe an e-commerce store. See, something like things that will make you, things that actually can be used in the real world to start a startup or like a business or something, you know, real things. And then yeah, you can try implementing the same use context, auth context type of functionality that we implemented inside these little projects that you start on your own. And then I'm sure after 1-2 times, yeah, after like 1-2 times that you try, you should be pretty conversant with it. Because yeah, I mean I get it, it looks difficult, but it shouldn't be that hard. Yeah, you get it after a few practices, you know, just 1-2 application to build implementing the same auth context functionality, right? Yeah, so don't worry. Yeah, and if you still don't understand, you can go back and then rewatch this part again, and yeah, I'm pretty sure it should be good. Right, so I'm going to say that this is going to be the end of the part 1 of the authentication using the auth context, and then yeah, we'll definitely go in depth into the other parts in the next videos. Thank you very much for getting to this point. Bye.